Hey there, 8th grade students. Welcome to today's Explainer. Today we aren't just memorizing history. We are actually learning how to become truth detectives. We're going to dive deep into the world of historical sources, and more importantly, figure out exactly how to analyze them. By the end of this, you'll be able to sift through all the noise, look straight at the evidence, and uncover the real story. So let's jump right in. Here's a quick look at our roadmap for today's mission. We're going to start with the search for truth, move on to defining bias and perspective, and then get some practice spotting bias in history. After that, we'll see why multiple perspectives matter before wrapping the whole thing up with how education is tied to morality. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the search for truth, the foundation of fairness. So I want you to stop and just think about this for a second. Think about all the media you consume every single day. When you're scrolling through social media, watching a quick video, or reading a news article, are you actually getting the whole truth? Or are you just getting one tiny, carefully selected side of the story? We live in the information age, which is absolutely amazing, but it also means we're constantly bombarded with opinions that are disguised as facts. The big idea we need to establish right out of the gate is that every single source you interact with was made by a human being, and because of that, it reflects a specific point of view. If we just accept information blindly without asking any questions, it's super easy to be deceived. As truth detectives, our number one rule is to never just take things at face value. And this brings us to a really foundational quote from Proverbs chapter 24, verse 23. To show partiality in judging is not good. I really want to anchor our entire lesson in this concept today. You see, being able to analyze history and spot the truth isn't just some boring academic skill you use to pass a social studies test. It's actually a moral imperative. Fairness and impartial judgment matter deeply. When we show partiality, like when we unfairly favor one side over another without looking at all the evidence, we aren't just being bad historians. We're actually failing to act with justice and integrity. Seeking the truth fairly is simply the right thing to do. Moving right along to Section 2, defining bias and perspective, knowing the difference. To be a top-notch detective, you've got to know exactly what you're hunting for. So let's break down our terms. First up is bias. Bias happens when a source strongly favors one side or perspective, and in doing so, it often ignores or actively hides evidence that supports the other side. This creates a highly distorted, or at best, incomplete version of events. Honestly, recognizing bias is your absolute best defense against accepting unfair or unreliable information as a stone-cold fact. If a writer or speaker has a heavy bias, they aren't giving you a clear window into history, they're giving you a funhouse mirror. It literally warps the truth to fit whatever they want you to believe. Next, we have point of view. Now, this is slightly different from bias. A point of view is just the unique perspective a person brings to an event. It reflects their own background, their culture, their experiences, and their personal beliefs. The really important thing to remember here is that having a point of view is completely natural. You have a point of view, I have a point of view. We can't escape it. But as historians, we have to understand the author's background to fully grasp why they're telling the story the way they are. A point of view only becomes a harmful bias when it actively twists the truth to suppress other valid perspectives. All right, Section 3, spotting bias in history, the truth detective in action. Let's put this into practice with a real-world historical example so we can really see how this works. Picture this. It's the year 1898. You pick up a newspaper and you read a blazing, intense editorial about the Spanish-American War. Now, this specific newspaper happens to be extremely pro-war. To convince the public to get on board, the writers start heavily exaggerating events. They use this overly dramatic language, blow minor incidents completely out of proportion, and totally leave out any peaceful diplomatic efforts that were happening in the background. That right there, that is a classic example of bias in action. The writer is deliberately twisting the facts to push a very specific, aggressive agenda onto their readers. But let me ask you, why on earth might this newspaper actually want to encourage a war? This is where you have to think critically about the motives behind the source. Well, maybe the owner of the newspaper genuinely believes a war will increase the country's global power. Or it could be even simpler. Maybe dramatic, scary war stories just sell a whole lot more newspapers than boring stories about peace treaties. Those underlying motives create a massive bias. When you figure out why someone is writing something, you are in a much better position to see exactly how they're trying to manipulate the narrative. Here's another fantastic example of how point of view changes literally everything. Think about the American Revolution. If you were reading a journal entry written by a loyalist, meaning someone loyal to the British crown, they described the events as a completely unlawful rebellion. From their perspective, they saw chaos, treason, and a total breakdown of law and order. But if you read a letter written by a patriot on that exact same day, they described those exact same events as a glorious fight for liberty. Same exact historical event, two completely different realities. This brilliantly shows us that history isn't just a cold, dusty list of dates to memorize. It's a vibrant and sometimes really messy collection of differing human perspectives. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, Why Multiple Perspectives Matter, Finding the Balance. So, the million-dollar question is, how do we actually find the truth when literally everyone has a point of view? Let's recap the key insights from what we've learned so far. First, we know for sure that bias can severely affect the accuracy and reliability of a source. Second, we understand that points of view naturally reflect a person's background and beliefs. Therefore, our third point is basically the golden rule of history. Good historians, the really good truth detectives, always look at multiple perspectives. You can't just read the Patriot's letter. You've got to read the Loyalist's journal, too. Investigating multiple angles is literally the only effective way to counteract the inaccuracies caused by human bias and piece together what actually happened. When you start looking at all those multiple perspectives, you can find or even create what we call a balanced source. Think of a beautifully written, deeply researched biography. A great author doesn't just interview the person's best friends, right? They also dig into the writings of their harshest critics and rivals. They present the facts from multiple sides to intentionally reduce that bias. This is the absolute gold standard for how to handle differing points of view fairly. It gives you, the reader, the respect and the space to look at the whole picture and make up your own mind based on all the evidence. And finally, Section 5, Education Tied to Morality, the HeroesMart Philosophy. To wrap things up, I want us to pull back and look at the big picture for a second. Why are we even learning all this? Well, the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learner series intertwines biblical morality directly with its educational approach. And here's the reasoning behind that. In the book of Romans, chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, there is this profound promise. Peace of mind is promised to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual. Engaging with knowledge, like learning how to identify bias and hunt for the truth, through a spiritual and moral lens, doesn't just make you a better student. It's actually presented as a pathway to ultimate peace of mind. Think about the contrast between these two paths. Within this framework, what is the point of being incredibly book smart if you're just going to use that knowledge to deceive people, right? This philosophy argues that education without morality is basically a tool without a compass. It just leads to making bad choices that end up hurting you and the people around you. On the flip side, education with morality cultivates a spiritual mind. It ensures that as you become this brilliant truth detective, you're being guided by a really strong moral compass. The whole idea is that you use your skills to champion fairness, justice, and truth, which ultimately brings lasting peace to your life and to your community. And that brings us to our final question for this explainer. As you head out into the real world today, as you're scrolling through your feeds, reading your textbooks, or just talking with your friends, are you going to let bias distort your worldview? Will you allow yourself to be easily manipulated by one-sided stories? Or will you take the moral high ground, use the detective skills you've learned today, and actively seek out the unbiased, whole truth? The choice is entirely up to you, detectives. Keep your minds sharp, keep your hearts fair, and I will see you in the next explainer.